saying, arguing with common sense, you know, of course people should be accountable. I think it's the type of accountability we see. We see accountability imposed externally by people who don't necessarily understand educational context in the nuanced way. And therefore it's a very simplistic form of accountability. And what we see, and this is very, very clear in Scotland, the research we've done on our Nuffield Foundation project this year, is that government imposes certain forms of output regulation, so the measurement of performance against standards set in the curriculum, for example, benchmarks, or the use of raw examinations data to show whether attainment's going up or down. And these sorts of things then are used as a very narrow proxy measure of a school effectiveness or school worth, and then as a result of that, we're then sending a very clear signal that if you want to do well, you have to do certain things. So what we're doing is encouraging performativity in the system, and we see that very clearly in Scotland. So one example we had was a school that had decided that because the results in technology in the senior phase, the examination phase, were poor, the easy option was just to get rid of the subject. Right? You couldn't improve the results because the teachers weren't good enough and the kids weren't doing well enough, so just get rid of the subject. Now that goes actually completely counter to the notion of a broad and balanced curriculum where technology is part of the offering that people have. But that's the sort of instrumental decision making that we get if we focus only on accountability. Now, another way of looking at accountability for me is to look at it from the view of inputs. How do you equip teachers with the professionalism, the professional attitudes to become excellent teachers? What sort of supports do they need? What sort of knowledge, professional learning do they need? And all these sorts of things. And if you do that, then what you're doing is you're instilling a professional accountability which is internalised. And that is quite different to an external sort of performative accountability. So, I think that one of the best things we can do moving forward actually in the future is to get rid of this idea that everything has to be spelled out and measured. We work with broad purposes of education. We work out for ourselves as a system what people need to learn and be able to do to achieve that, and we equip people with the knowledge and skills and support and resources to do that properly.
Well, I could, because this is what I've looked into my research very much about Teachers Curriculum Agency, this very issue, and like Mark was saying, I mean, in my case, you saw from the 2011 curriculum when it came, it was very much not like the new curriculum you're talking about, and it was much more subject-oriented, like a neo-conservative idea, but also bringing forward, I mean, teacher professionalism and talking about teachers should do something with this. At the same time, we had, for the first time, like knowledge requirements, very close to how everything should be assessed, the core content that was to be taught. And the teachers, they were, oh, how should I find time to do all this? And then you see that when they had to work together, that what we saw, and they started to, I mean, like with this professional responsibility or accountability, working together, trying to, well, interdisciplinary, trying to find ways to exam content in different subjects together. So you could see that, I mean, the flexibility in that way they used to help each other out. Another perspective that could be used is also talk about from professional theory, like occupational professionalism, the idea of how teachers, how teachers talk their as an occupation, professionalism, and the organization of professionalism on the other hand, which is more like different standards and so on that person. And this creates kind of like a continuum, more like a force field between these two. I know some works of Moore and Clark, for instance, that could also be a take on looking at it from a different angle, not very much that curriculum in that sense, more from professional theory, but it could also be something to look into to find that tension.
Thank you.
And also I think that outcomes-based outcomes through the curriculum is just one type of curriculum that you have. Stenhouse provides a very good criticism of these kind of objectives-driven curriculum, and he offers a process-driven curriculum where you do have some kind of general kind of aims. He conceptualizes it as like concepts and learning experiences as outcomes, but then he also talks about that this may not be applicable for all kind of subjects, because you have subjects with different kind of what Bernstein calls like collection and integration kind and that also may not apply to every subject. So it is even, I think, way more kind of complex than just saying that, okay, these are the outcomes, and it is measurable in all subjects in the kind of same way, because in maths it is different to have certain kind of, to measure knowledge in maths is totally different than in other subjects.
So Mary James wrote a very good piece on Stenhouse about 15 years ago, 2012 or something like that, maybe it wasn't 10 years ago, and she was basically pointing to the fact that despite some of the anachronisms in Stenhouse, he talks about the teacher as a man, for example, all the way through it, but the work that Stenhouse was writing in 1975 is as applicable now in the wake of these sort of modern technical curricula that we have as it was in the 1970s when he was critiquing, along with contemporaries like Schwab and so on, some of the objectives movement in the States which had taken hold, and even some of the advocates that the objectives movement actually were a bit more nuanced. Hilda Tabor's work, I remember, I've read it for a long time now, but I remember it as being quite an interesting take on taking objectives, and it was, although it was a sort of fairly linear approach, I think it was nuanced in its linearity.
And even Tyler, who is attached to these objectives driven, well, in that historical moment, he was trying to shift from something else, from curriculum as a list of content. So also talking about pedagogy and assessment in a way was opening up the notion, but he has been sort of not understood historically in his context, in his space-time since, I think. And interestingly, a lot of the international testing, like PISA, does have a background, a very geographical and historical background in the Cold War and in the race and the push for science and mathematics and technology in the 50s and 60s.
I think we certainly need to resist the sort of instrumentalisation of education broadly in curriculum, I suppose more specifically, and to think about how we work towards achievable educational purposes. And I would argue that educational purpose should be at the heart of what we do. And too often what we see in practice is, and the research we've done in Scotland illustrates this very neatly again, is that those purposes become obscured, they become forgotten, and actually people are always working towards much more short-term instrumental stuff. And the decision making they make is extremely instrumental as a result of that.